Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of What's Next, my LinkedIn Live series. I'm super excited. I have to say, I don't do these as often as I wish I could, but when I get the opportunity to interview someone like Jon McNeill, I'm like, my hands are raising, I'm jumping up and down, and I can't wait to have this conversation. So sharing it with all of you, thank you for joining us here today. But Jon's resume reads like a playbook. I'm going to read this because it's just too good to miss anything. He was appointed by Elon Musk as president of Tesla after the introduction from Meta's Sheryl Sandberg. And during his tenure, he helped scale revenue from 2 billion to 20 billion in, wait for it, 30 months. He later served as COO of Lyft, doubling revenue and leading the company's IPO. And today he co-founds and scales companies at DVX Ventures, where he has launched 12 ventures, delivered 6x returns to investors. His leadership experience spans every stage of growth: founder, CEO, board member at GM, Lululemon, CrossFit, and Asurion, an advisor to historian Walter Isaacson for all of you who read the book Elon Musk. Now he can be added as an author. I'm so excited for everyone to read The Algorithm. It's the first book written by any of Elon's direct reports, but we're going to really dig into a whole litany of things. So I'm super excited to have you, Jon. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Like, I'm always like reading the bio while the person's on, they're kind of like, but I couldn't resist. There's just too much goodness in there for me to not ignore, I might say. We'll get into the book in a second, because I kind of want to end there because I think it's a culmination of a lot of the work that you've done. But I kind of want to lean into it. Okay. There's a few things that you have been talking about of late that I find super fascinating, and I think many listening will find equally fascinating. We've got the Industrial Revolution 4.0, and everyone's talking about when's the next one coming, and then it's SaaS 3.0 and AI. Everyone's got their acronyms to the changes, but you now are talking about VC 2.0, and that really intrigued me because I think everyone always associates venture capital with San Francisco and the Bay Area, yet there's so many other vibrant communities out there. And there was a great thread conversation that you were having with Brian Halligan, the former CEO and chairman of HubSpot, on this very thing in the Boston ecosystem. But you really unpacked kind of all the things people need to think about when trying to raise money and expand their footprint and make those investments. And maybe you could just start from why do you think we're at a VC 2.0 and what people should be thinking about if they're listening and trying to raise money and get in front of those people who want to invest?
I think the first realization for me was like, I'm a 6-time founder. And so I've had 6 companies with VCs in the cap table. And one thing that stood out to me was that the VC structure of a 2 and 20 fund hasn't changed in about 50 years since it was invented. And it was invented just in Boston in the ecosystem there, and then spread worldwide. And so you've got a major shift that's happened over the past 5 years in VC, where I would say for the first 45 years of VC, the VCs were oriented around smaller funds and large carry as their motivation. And what happened over the last 5 years is these funds have raised enormous amounts of capital, and they've become asset managers. And so the money that they can make off of fees is significant. And so there's been an emphasis shift from the carry to the fees. And what that means is less risk taking, and just bigger checks into more sure bets, but smaller multiples of returns for investors. So I started to think about that and studied kind of who was doing things differently and what those different structures could look like, and ran across a couple of examples that were quite different and quite successful. One is Sutter Hill in Silicon Valley, and the other is Flagship Pioneering in Cambridge, Mass. If you change the signs on the door, just switched them, and went inside, the outcomes in the process look almost the same. Those 2 firms create companies from scratch. They're staffed not by investors, but by operators. And each of the firms has been around about 25 years. And in those 25 years, they've each created more than 70 companies. Out of those 70 companies, 20 are public and 40 have been sold. So they're getting 6 out of 7. So there's no power law. and they're generating returns that are the envy of the industry. In fact, I think a lot of people think Mike Spicer at Sutter Hill, deservedly so, may be the GOAT of VC investors, because his track record has just been stellar, long before Snowflake. And so I started to think about, is there a second model to be built here? And so when I spent time with Mike and spent time with Nubar Afeyan, who's the founder of Flagship, Flagship you would know for things like Moderna and Indigo Ag, and Sutter Hill you would know for things like Snowflake and Prism and Pure. These are not small companies that they've created. They are very, very large companies. But when I asked them both, like, what's your secret sauce? They said, oh, there's no investors here. And I said, what do you mean? You guys are known as unbelievable investors. And they said, no, we're operators. We've got teams of the best operators in the world. And we know what good people look like. We know what good product looks like. We know what good go-to-market looks like. We know what good operations look like. We know what good finance teams look like, et cetera. So we can really bend the curve of the outcome of these companies. So I decided to form a firm of the best operators that I've worked with in my career, some incredible people from Tesla and Lyft in some of my prior companies, and to really run that playbook. Start companies from scratch. You've got an outsized ownership percentage to begin with because you're starting them, and then go find second and third time entrepreneurs who want to do their next company but don't have the next idea. They come with domain, they come with experience in that 0 to 1 stage, which is so hard, and they come with talent. And so we started this approach 5 years ago with this firm called DVX. We've created 17 companies, and right now our returns are in the top 5% of all VC funds. So we're one more data point in this string of, hey, there might be a VC 2.0 here. Not that VC 1.0 is broken and needs to be replaced. But like a lot of things, this is like the software market or the chip market. Version 1 of the chip is great for certain tasks in certain environments, but version 2 of the chip is better. And there's more than a handful of us now working on what version 2 of VC could look like.
And you think that there is a sort of a focus, if you will, in thinking about that they have the talent and the know-how, but they don't have the idea. Yeah. And I think all ideas right now are circling the drain around AI. I mean, you can't get in and out of a conversation anywhere. At least I can't. I don't know about you, where that isn't the first thing out of the mouth, right? Like, how will it impact our industry? Is SaaS going to get cut in half? Like, what's going to happen with the chip manufacturers? Who's going to win there? What's going to go on in the future with NVIDIA? Like, all those things. But I feel like it's not just that, especially around AI. It is really this being able to execute against all the things that have promised in this sort of 7 trillion that's floating around that group, right? Like,
that's right.
Do we have enough footprint, data center, power, cooling? Like, there's almost so much infrastructure issues we have to solve that when you're looking for ideas, if everyone's running towards AI, it's kind of the shiny thing, like SaaS was, like the internet was, like EVs were, and we'll talk about Tesla in a second. But, how do you determine what that right idea is?
Like, there's so much happening. We launched, understanding how important infrastructure was, we launched as part of our firm, we launched a very innovative active ETF company. Because when I looked at all the ETFs in the AI infrastructure space, or all the funds that were available for investors, they're all on a market cap weighted basis. And so what that means is you've put NVIDIA and AMD into a fund and they overwhelm the fund. And so you might as well just own NVIDIA and AMD. But I knew that wasn't what went into AI data centers. So we took a look at the bill of material of AI data centers and said, there's more than 60 public stocks here. And 30 of them are domestic, 30 are international. There's things that people weren't looking at all, like fiber and substrates and power electronics and high bandwidth memory at the time. And we created an active ETF, really managed by and with the people that were actually doing the builds of AI data centers. So we could ask them on a monthly basis, like, what's changing in your POs? And they'd say, oh, this substrate changes, or oh, this chip is changing. We'd say, well, who makes that chip, or who makes that networking software? And we've created the #1 performing AI infrastructure fund over the last 12 months. It's up 62%. It would have been a great place to put your money a year ago. I think it's a great place to put your money now. But my point is, it's like, The infrastructure, this is a really unique window in time because there's literally 5 years worth of purchase orders that have been put out in the market for this stuff. And some of the stuff is readily available and some of the stuff is not. And then determining what the substitutes will be on the stuff that's not is pretty important. So there's an infrastructure layer that's being built, and the infrastructure layer was largely for the foundation models who absorb enormous amounts of compute to train. And now we're seeing this growth of inference, which is now we're asking the models for output. And when we ask for output, inference compute gets really important. Inference data centers look different than the training data centers. There's different chips that are needed, different styles of architecture. And so I think on the infrastructure side, we're at maybe the top out or two of the first inning. This could go a long time. And there's a lot more upside. The more users that come onto AI, the more questions that are asked is going to drive the compute up. And of course, there will be advancements in the efficiency of compute. So the curve won't be logarithmic, but it will be steady up and to the right. And so that's an important thing to understand, I think, as an investor and a participant. And then to your question, like, where do we look? We look at AI. We're looking at vertical AI applications that we think have a very long durability runway. So they're highly durable to competition, et cetera. The horizontal tools and horizontal platforms are exposed, we think, because with the kind of coding tools that are available, it becomes easier and easier to displace the horizontal tools, but harder, we think, to displace the process-driven vertical tools. So that's where we tend to play.
Well, super exciting. Not that I'm in the stock promoting business, but there's a tip.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like way out of what I would ever, advise. But that gives me a great segue to sort of where I wanted to take this next, because I would be remiss, obviously, being the president of Tesla. It's and Walter Isaacson, sort of, a sort of resource for him. He was writing the book, Elon Musk. Knowing everything you know now, if you could go back to that person that Sheryl Sandberg said, hey, I'm going to make this introduction, and knowing everything you know about where the market's gone, where, EVs have gone, where technology's gone, would you have made different decisions that you made during that time? And I can't say if you were tapped again, would you go back? But because it's not really the question. The question would be, if you were tapped again, well, what would you have done differently? So I'm going to come at it like, if you knew everything you know now and you were tapped, what would you have done differently?
I think it's a really good question because it was kind of all out just to meet the moment. Teams were working so creatively and so hard because, as you said in the intro, that team grew revenue from $2 billion to $20 billion in 30 months. Like there's no playbook for that. There's no playbook at scale for how you grow that fast worldwide, 33 markets, 36 different languages, how you grow from 4,000 to 40,000 people and preserve a culture. Like there's just a ton of lessons in that time. And so to your question, if I look back and say, what could we have done differently? On the margin, there's a bunch of things that come to mind of just smarter hiring and more stable roadmaps and stuff that on the margin could have improved maybe that number from 20 to 22 billion, let's say.
Yeah. Yep.
But what was forged in that culture now is coming to life not only at Tesla, but at SpaceX and at Starlink and at xAI, which is you've got a whole culture of people that are very, very capable. And when asked to do the impossible, they don't say no. Their first answer is, I don't know how to do that, but I'll figure it out. And there's this humility and confidence that's married in that response. There's a humility to say, I have no idea. Like when Elon would come to me and say, you got to double this company every 8 months. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. But there's a quiet confidence that we've got the kind of people around us that are going to help us figure that out. And so I think the decisions that were made along that growth curve for EVs now are paying off in a bunch of different places because there's a system. The algorithm is a system that's described in the book, but there's also a culture behind it and incredible talent that's behind it as well. And I think, could we have foreseen this disruption in the EV market? Probably not, but thank God we made the decision to get into Asia and Europe because EVs are the thing there and they remain the thing. And I think we forget that in the bubble of American policy and news cycle that we're in. EV demand may have slowed here, but it didn't slow down anywhere else. It's the game. And I think America is going to have to get back in that game in a really serious way because automotive is a couple of $1 trillion of our GDP. And that's substantive. And we shouldn't want to roll over and give that up.
Yeah. If you take tech out of the GDP right now, we're in trouble, right? I mean, it's just, it's very different than the numbers that are getting shared. If you pull out that, 5 years worth of POs in the pipeline, right?
That's right.
Pull that out. And so, with that, there's a couple of things you said, one, just when getting asked to do something, I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out. And that to me is a culture of put smart people together and let them go.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. And for me as well, I'm not saying I have a better understanding there's probably nobody better than you that has a clearer understanding of what do you think is misunderstood between the management style of Elon with that company and that asking and putting smart people together, right? Because from the outside looking in, it's just like 24/7 all the time, grinding, and that might be the case. Like, lots of people do it. But that isn't sustainable, over time. And nor is it something that's not a culture you'd be like, we're proud of this culture. We're proud of the results of what the culture is able to do, but you may not be proud of how the sausage is made, if you will. So what do you think is the most misunderstood in that?
I think what's most misunderstood is the 24/7 aspect. We kind of all looked at each other and said, hey, we're going to be here from like 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day and cranking every workday, and we're going to crank. But outside of that, people have to take a breath and they've got to recharge and they've got to have a life. And I was no different. Like I wanted to be a good dad. I wanted to be a good husband, and I can't do that if I'm 24 hours in the factory.
Right.
And so I often would say to people, you could roll a bowling ball through here at 7 o'clock at night and not hit a single person because people were highly efficient from 8 a.m. to say 7 p.m. But after that, people let go. There was some exceptions to that. And that was if you were on a team that was hypercritical to something that was either going wrong or needed to go right, that could be for a stint, super intense work. And so there were nights that I did sleep in the factory for a few weeks in a row, trying to solve a problem that if we didn't solve it, the company wasn't going to survive because we didn't have enough cash to get through the downside of that problem. But that wasn't the norm. And so I think that's misunderstood yes, it is it's an intense place, but it's not a 24/7 burnout place for people. It is, but it is during the day. I used to describe to people, this is not regular Army. This is special forces. We're operating at a very high level during those core work hours.
Yeah. And I think just across your experience at the places I mentioned, right, whether it's on the board of GM or Lululemon or, being the CEO and having 6 or 7 startups and having these funds, you do get this really unique line of sight of what works, right? And I think that's really the foundation of the algorithm. And one of the things that you say, and I wonder if you learned this in your Tesla days, is this, you talk about deleting steps, right? Deleting steps and questioning requirements. And I think that's the way you don't get caught in this 24/7 endless loop of working, right? It's like, if I'm going to do, what do I have to not do? And I think lots of people feel that when someone like you or an Elon Musk, right, says, I need this done, you just go, I will take it. But there's only 100%. So you're having to make decisions that I'm going to have to peel something off. What is really the priority? Can I understand what my boss is trying to get me to prioritize on? Do I need to prioritize myself? Do I you know what I mean? Like that whole, so I'd love for you to talk about, cause it's super counterintuitive.
It is. And
Yep.
to your point, like I can do more if let's say that something took me 10 steps. If I figure out how to do it in 2, I can do more. And uh, an illustration of that was we were trying to grow digital sales in like 2015, and nobody was buying a car online in 2015. Yep. And you couldn't use Apple Pay or anything like that to buy a car. But we took on this challenge of like, how could we get 25% of sales digitally and then 50% of sales digitally? Because what that would mean is we need less stores. So if we are successful at this, our lives get a lot simpler because we don't have to open stores around the world and train people and sign leases and manage that whole process. So we start out and it takes 64 clicks at the starting point to buy a Tesla.
Awesome.
And Elon and I sat down and he said, let's set a crazy goal. What do you think? And we walked out of that room. And we said, let's get this down to 10 clicks. Let's make it. We looked at how many clicks it would take to buy a pizza at Domino's, and we're like, let's try to do that.
Yeah.
So we used Domino's as the benchmark. We said, let's get down to 10 clicks. And one of the first buzzsaws we ran into was the whole financing process was like 40 of the 64 clicks. Yeah. And so the first step of the algorithm is to question requirements. So I go to the auto finance team and I say, why do we have so many clicks? And they say, well, because we have these contracts that have been written to protect the consumer. And these contracts are mandatory. The first thing that we do in the algorithm that we developed is to say, let's question that requirement. So who can tell me that whether these are legal or not? Like, let's look at the state requirements on a state-by-state basis. Are they really asking for 40-page documents that have to be like initialed on every corner? And it turned out when people went back and questioned that, it turned out not to be true. Yeah. And so I remember like a couple of days later, Elon and I were in a conference room together, and I said, these requirements around auto loan docs are quite different than we thought they were. In fact, a lot of these requirements don't exist. They've been made up by banks and other people trying to CYA, but there's no legal requirement for this stuff. So then we sat down and said, what's the elements of a contract to buy a car? It's pretty simple. Tiffany's going to buy a car for this price. She's going to pay over this period of time at this interest rate. And so therefore, here's the monthly payment. You can describe that in a paragraph, not 40 pages.
Yes.
So Elon's like, let's try that. So we went out to banks and said, could we do a one-click loan or lease with one paragraph? And all of them said, you guys are out of your mind. You're crazy. Like, nobody will do this. But eventually we found one bank that would. And that wiped out 24 clicks. I can't tell you how many human hours that resulted in eliminating, because people weren't having to like process documents and paper and all this stuff. We had literally hundreds of people moving paper around when somebody would buy a car. And that all went away. So by following the algorithm of questioning requirements, then removing steps, we were able to eliminate a lot of work. And that's part of the secret of this approach. And it's why people aren't working 24 by 7 by 365 or by 52, because what the operating system is doing at Tesla or at SpaceX is it's removing steps all the time. It's trying to simplify, get this down to actually the lowest common denominator at a really high performance level. And then you've got all sorts of resource you can do, because you're not doing the dumb stuff. Yeah,
I mean, you might know this story, you might not, right? Back when Ford was having problems a gazillion years ago, a long time ago, right? And thinking it was a product problem, and it was actually process.
Yeah.
Right. It was steps. It was not the people. They were trapped in bureaucracy and all of those things. And I think many organizations, like listening to this, the lesson there is always the customer effort is huge, right? Like, how much effort do they have to put in to do something with you, especially when it's like, give you money, make that easy.
Totally. Zero friction. Zero friction, right? Ought to be the goal. Yeah.
But I would say where many companies get this wrong is they over pivot. I'm not saying this is what happened at Tesla, but they over pivot to the customer and forget about the employee on the other side. So many companies will just lift that effort away from the customer and drop it on the employee. So now the customer doesn't have to do 62 steps. They only have to do 10, like dominoes.
Yeah.
But the employee has to do 20 steps behind the scenes. That's not fair either. Like, you got to balance the two. I wrote a whole book about it. I'm super passionate about
the
it,
tell
right?
is I had this great mentor. His name's Fred Massoni, and Fred would say, here's the tell. Did the work change or not? Like, to your point, like if the process stayed the same, you're just transferring it from the customer to the employee.
Yep.
You're not a very good business person.
No.
But if you completely redid the work, you took 40 pages of a loan doc down to a paragraph, then the work changed. That's the tell. And therefore you're not shoving it on the employee or somewhere else. You're actually adding value.
Well, and it's also that if you think about it in that journey, right? And you might think about this from other brands, not Tesla, like maybe a Lululemon or someone who has, like, different products than just side of the car.
Right.
But if you think through that, like legal goes, well, I'm only giving 3 steps. And then, finance says, well, I'm giving 2 steps. So that's frictionless, 2 steps, 3 steps. And then, marketing wants to know, and then sales needs, and then customer success needs, So when you add it all up, it's 30 steps. When you look at yourself individually, like, there's no friction. I'm asking for 1 thing or 2 things. But when you add it up, right, the silos in an organization, again, going back to what do you take off the table, right? What do you remove? What do you eliminate? And that also requires a very different mindset from leaders and executives.
That's right.
The algorithm is a way to say, let me challenge everything I know. But you have to have a beginner's mind. I'm going to steal Mark Benioff, right? Which is, the sort of expert's mind, everything, there's very little possibility. In the beginner's mind, there's tons. Totally. And if you're exponential,
yep,
and you have a fixed mindset, that almost doesn't work, right? It has to be you're exponential and you have a beginner's mindset, so that you can bring those 2 things together, which I think today everyone's looking for that great breakthrough of innovation, right? And so I'm going to lean on the algorithm, like, how can the things you talk about in the book, and also what you've learned obviously through your, illustrious career, where do you think they get that? I'm starving for that breakthrough innovation. Like, when you wrote your book, you sat in a particular chair to get inspired, right? And so what chair do they need to sit in to get inspired for this innovation breakthrough, or what is the option?
I think one of the things that Elon does super effectively is that he determines where the innovation needs to happen and assigns a team to that. And then that team meets with him weekly. And there's several kind of obvious dynamics that happen when a team has to meet with the CEO. You think they're bringing their B game or their A game? They're bringing their A game because they're meeting with the CEO.
I was going to say, you wouldn't come back again for another shot.
Do you want to show forward progress or show question? You want to show forward progress.
Yeah.
So imagine a company that is on a cadence of weekly improvement because the CEO is directly involved in this key area. And imagine how that compounds over time. And if your competitors aren't doing that, you're building this big gap. So I'll give you an example of that. So in one management team meeting, Elon gave the challenge to the entire team of us. Let's try to eliminate 50% of the costs from the manufacturing process, 50%. And the why was because we knew the Chinese were going to be doing that too. So if we want to be a survivor in this, we got to figure out how to take 50% of the cost out. And when you look at a car factory, it's basically divided in 2. It's on the first half of the factory footprint, it's a bunch of robots welding 300 parts together to make the skeleton of the car. In the second half of the factory is that skeleton then gets all kinds of things attached to it by humans. It gets the steel and the seats and the carpet and the electronics, all that stuff. So Doug Field, who was the head of engineering at the time, came up with this crazy idea to eliminate the first half of the factory. And that was, rather than welding 300 parts together, we were going to pour liquid aluminum into a mold and have 1 or 2 or 3 parts versus 300. And when he presented that idea, of course, everybody in the room, most of us have an engineering training or background said, Doug, that's impossible. You cannot make a mold that's going to be secure enough to hold molten aluminum at those temperatures and pressures. Like, you're going to blow up the factory, literally. Doug came to me and said, we're going to just innovate this on an incremental basis. We're going to meet every week. And so the first question he asked me was, do you have anything in the factory that we can use that's spare aluminum? I said, yeah, I have a bunch of scratch and dent rims, wheel rims that are that we can't use, and we throw them into the recycling scrap every week. He's like, great, we can use those. I'm going to get a smelter and we're going to start to melt stuff. And we're just going to start with small molds, like a mold as big as our hand, and see if we can get a part molded. And then we're going to try something bigger than that, and then bigger than that. So we're meeting every week. And sure enough, the teams that start to experiment start to figure out how to do bigger and bigger and bigger parts that are cast, not welded. And at the end of about a year, they've figured out how they can have a car body done with 3 parts, not 300. And they've eliminated half of the factory. So when you go look at the new factories, they don't have hundreds of robots doing welds. They've got 3 parts coming together. And that eliminated a huge amount of the manufacturing cost. But that was a major innovation that happened in increments in 52 different parts over the course of a year. It wasn't a breakthrough at the beginning. It was a breakthrough at the end. And the breakthrough came as a result of that innovation process. That's where it comes from.
Well, a funny story to tie together with what exactly you just said. It was probably in my first year I was at Salesforce. So let's call it, what year was that happened?
That was 2016, roughly 2017.
Okay. So it was 2017, 2018. You were Tesla was opening its first showroom in Australia. So it was in Sydney. It was Brisbane and then Sydney.
Yep.
And so what we did was we did these innovation dinners at the Tesla store. And,
cool.
And then we had, someone come in, and we had dinner table, and we had a chef come in, and everything was catered. But the experience was at the Tesla store. And so it was CIOs and executives from, local big businesses to talk about innovation.
Yeah.
And the opening was this manufacturing of the frame. So the frame, if you remember, right, the frame was in the lobby of the showrooms. Yep. Like, wasn't the car, it was just the frame.
Right.
And I think the battery was in it. So
exactly.
I think it was both things, right? So you talked about the frame and the battery as these two innovative marvels, right? And then that was the spark of the conversation for the entire evening around how to innovate. So funny you picked that story. And I was right in the thick of that with doing a joint thing. And it was a lot of fun. But it was a great way to get executives' juices flowing around what would be their lean in over 52 weeks? What would be their stand up to fix? What would be their audacious moonshot? Right. What would be the thing that they would go after? And knowing all that, and obviously knowing the book and your experience, when you're sitting in front of an executive and you're sort of telling them these things, what's the thing that you get the greatest resistance about? What's the sort of pushback where they're like, yeah, not us, or that's not how we do things? Like, what is the normal, just initial reaction that you get from executives when you start telling examples like this of how these kinds of things actually transpire, that it is not a light bulb moment, The
biggest piece of resistance I get is the executives don't want to own it. They don't want to be a part. They don't want to lead the process.
Not what I expected you to say. Wow.
I'm a strategy person. I'm a capital allocator. CEOs shouldn't be involved in the micro like that. And that's the biggest piece of resistance I get. And actually, there's this old story from the auto industry in the 1980s where the Japanese were absolutely destroying U.S. automotive companies in the marketplace, just outcompeting them, better product, taking huge chunks of market share. And the executives at Toyota and Honda lived on their manufacturing floors, literally. And eventually, the U.S. government put a huge amount of pressure on the Japanese government to say, you need to let our executives of our American companies come over and see how you do this in Japan. And eventually the Japanese companies relented because their government said, you guys, like, we have to do this. We'll be in a trade war.
Right.
So you got to let them in. So famously, the executives from the American car companies come over and they see these executives working on the floor and they say, this will never work here. And the Japanese kind of recognize the same thing, how resistant the US CEOs and senior execs were. And they went back after the trip and they told the Japanese government they can come anytime because they'll never implement this.
Yeah.
And the US auto execs went back to their executive dining rooms and back to their private jets. And the biggest piece of resistance I get is this reluctance to actually lead from the front. And that is core to innovation, because essentially what you're showing people is where the emphasis needs to be in the company. To your point, like, what is the topic of the stand-up? Why are we doing this? We're going to take 50% of cost out because if we don't, we won't survive. We're going to have autonomy because 10 years from now, if a car's not autonomous, people aren't buying it. So I'm going to be personally involved in leading this and understanding it because I have to allocate capital to it. At the end of the day, that's my role as a CEO. I'm the final capital allocator. So I really better understand this. But there's a lot of resistance to that.
Well, if you hear that and you go, well, that's a big enterprise company and it's global and it's a car manufacturer, whatever, I'd say all you have to do is watch Undercover Boss. That's it. It is the same thing.
Yep,
Smaller
exactly.
scales, right? Like if you're going to manage from an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc, whatever your preference is, then and you're in the four walls and you wait for your team to tell you what their perspective is what's happening, and you don't really know what's happening. I mean, one thing I heard as a common thread that was misunderstood. First, I'd say the 24/7, but second, I'd say, like, you kind of know that the allure is that Elon is very involved. I don't know how he does it across 5 or 6 multi-billion-dollar businesses, because that's a lot of context switching. But if the systems are the same, it's easier to manage, right?
And if you simplify, so Elon had read the 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss's book from 20 years ago.
Yep.
And he had a very Elon-like response to that, which was, oh, if I could work 4 hours per company, I could run like 15 companies in the same work week. This is pretty cool. But to do that, you've got to determine what are the 1 or 2 things as a leader you need to be involved in at a detail level, and then you let all the rest go.
Yep.
So one of the fun things about working for him in a Musk company is that if it's not one of those 2 things, you have complete agency as a leader, complete agency. But in those 1 or 2 things, he's pulling you in with him because he wants all the brain power, as much brain power as possible around that table to help solve that big problem.
So there's 2 things there. 1, be involved, but 2, be willing to let go.
Yeah. Be involved. Pick your spot.
Yep.
Then be involved, then let go of everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Jon, I could keep going. I'm kind of bummed out that it's time for us to end, but thank you for showing us the disruptive growth isn't magic. It's a mindset, systems, and relentless willingness to challenge what we think we know. For everyone watching, the biggest takeaway isn't just the algorithm itself, which please go pick up a copy of the book. It's the invitation to reimagine how we lead, how we show up, and what we do every day. To question the obvious, to simplify the complex, and to trust the acceleration comes with when we empower people and teams to do all that they can do without us, which I think is the key point here. So thank you so much for joining, being such an amazing trailblazer, for a great book, for all your stories. I hope you're willing to come back again and join us on the show, but it's just been a real pleasure.
Same. Really nice to be with you, Tiffany.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this episode of LinkedIn Live, What's Next? I'm your host, Tiffany Bova, and we'll see you on the other side and see you the next time. Thank you so much.